Deputy Connolly.
Thanks very much, and you're very welcome. Rasharish, we're going from Panama to paradise, and in between we have the red apple. You know, I appreciate the work the Revenue do. I appreciate the work the Department of Finance do, but we do. I'm certainly not one to quote President Trump, but he certainly has a view in relation to Ireland. And whatever narrative has gone out there, the narrative is going out that we're not paying our fair share of taxes in relation to. You'd accept that, Mr. McCarthy, would you? The narrative that's out there that Ireland is seen as a place where less tax is paid than other countries. You'd accept that's the narrative?
There's certainly a negative over the past couple of months. I think that the narrative has been poor from an Irish perspective.
The last couple of months. We've had a number of tax amnesties, and we have the dirt inquiry.
It has been especially poor over the last couple of months.
Okay. All right. Just, Mr. Cody, just in relation to Tax Justice Network Ireland, very broad range of organisations. They're having just a specific question. I'll come to this in a minute. It's just been passed on to all of us. They're having a session at 4 o'clock next week. Will any of the Revenue go along to that, or any of the Department of Finance, to hear the concerns being raised by these?
Well, representatives of our office regularly attend.
So there will be somebody there next week at the launch of their tax schemes.
I imagine if we were invited, we regularly attend. All those,
that's great.
We end up on joint forums in
that's okay.
EU
but
in
in relation, I don't know much about this. Just they've obviously serious concerns, and they're launching a report called Tax Games: The Race to the Bottom, hosted by Irish Tax Justice Network. So, no, that's okay. I'm not asking for an answer here. What I'm raising here is obviously very serious concerns in relation to tax and tax avoidance or tax evasion, both. You accept that there are serious concerns?
Well,
yeah.
Deputy, the whole engagement over the last 6 or 7 years has been around multinationals, the base erosion and profit shifting process. Okay. And that's all that environment.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what the Revenue is doing, but just it has been. The issues have come to the fore, not really because of proactive work, although I'm sure you're going to contradict me, but they've come from the concerned journalists. They've come from various other outside sources in relation to Paradise and Panama and so on. Isn't that right? And then the Revenue are left trying to react. Would you accept that?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. Okay. If we look at tax evasion using offshore accounts and financial accounts, we have been proactive in that. As I outlined last night, we sought 40 High Court orders from early 2000s up to 2015 to compel financial institutions provide us with information on accounts held.
And you've given that as an example of best practice, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. So did the Paradise Papers come as a surprise to you, or did it not then, with all your experience and your best practice in offshore accounts? Was it something you were expecting?
Well, the idea that we were expecting leaks of information from any institution, it's not that we expect or don't expect, but we're very interested when it happens. And I was appointed to this job on the 1st of February 2015. 2 weeks later, there was the first of these leaks. HSB Swiss, significant documents provided, in which I was, in March that year, I came into the Public Accounts Committee at the time to report on our activity in HSB Swiss. And it was really interesting in that any of the entities that had an Irish involvement, a significant number we had already dealt with. We had already prosecuted 4 of the people who had used the HSBC Swiss structure for serious tax evasion. We then had the LuxLeaks was the second of the big process which the ICIJ were involved in, and then we had the Panama Papers, and each of those sets of leaks we have analysed and we have looked to see if there are cases with an Irish interest. For example, in the context of the Panama Papers, we know that there was a number of jurisdictions who paid for the underlying data to whoever got the information from Mossack Fonseca. We weren't offered the information, which I think is probably significant and probably underlines the fact that there is not significant Irish tax evasion. I have to stress tax evasion, because we can only collect tax in accordance with the Irish legislation. We now have the Paradise Papers. There are 71 entities with an Irish connection, 603 addresses and 802 individuals with an Irish, that the ICIJ say are Irish. The information that has been provided publicly is essentially a kind of a spreadsheet setting out names, addresses, and the underlying data and the financial data has not been made publicly available. We have written to the Irish Times and we've written to the ICIJ asking them, and this is set out in the and I thought because of the Paradise Papers it was appropriate that we should send you the opening statement that I made last night. And we are in a process of looking for that.
So you're in an active process of following up on that? Absolutely. Okay.
And I think that one of the things that's really interesting, that's 4 sets of information essentially has come out of various financial institutions or advisors. I am absolutely certain that this is going to be a trend that will continue, and to the extent that there's information that comes to light. I think some of the things that are interesting is we are seeing in some of the documents that are written about in the press information that we would never be provided. Like advisors and their agents do not share with ourselves some of their thinking. Okay. And there's a colour in it, and we welcome that type of information. And if a person wants to approach us with information that they have, we are always open. We get those type of information.
I'd love to engage with you longer because it's very interesting, but I'm going to be limited, so I'm going to go specific now in relation to search and development. And that's one of the key areas, the key reasons why tax liability might be reduced, isn't that right? And when you were before us in June, a number of factors. So obviously it's a very good policy decision in relation to research and development, and you have no say over that anyway. And then it leads to a reduction in tax liability. And the important role for you is to monitor that it's being used appropriately. So when you were before us in June, there were serious issues in relation to, you were using outsourcing to experts, and there was questions of tax compliance certs. Have those issues been sorted out now? Well, let me rephrase that. It hadn't been checked that they were tax compliant. It was an issue raised with the experts that you were using. Just tell me yes or no that that's been sorted out.
Yes, absolutely. That was to do with issues around tax clearance. Yeah, sorry, right. Absolutely. Okay. That's been. Now,
the next way, at that point you made, and you might clarify this for me, you mandating the section 766 of the Taxes Consolidation Act. You were talking about the mandating the use of that would lead to more visibility in the relation to the yield from research and development. Can you clarify for me, has that happened or where's that at?
My understanding is it happened. It has happened.
Just clarify what it means.
No, what the challenge we had was to say what element of the recovery was actually a restriction on the R&D element of the credit. Because if we go in to do an audit on a company that has an R&D credit, yes, we do not necessarily restrict ourselves to a problem with the R&D credit. So you could find that there was a problem on expenses for employees.
Yeah.
So in collection or audit yield, it wasn't necessarily clear that the full recovery in an R&D audit was a restriction on the R&D credit, and that's the controller in his study of it recommended that we would capture exactly what was the restriction of the credit. So what we have done is we have mandated our officers, when they have the recovery, to raise the assessment and collect it using a specific section of the Act, and that's then recorded in our IT systems, and then we'll be able to say exactly the restriction was that.
So
the only thing that I can't 100% off the top of my head, because I didn't come in with that piece of paper in my head, is the idea of whether our IT system enhancement has taken place.
Right.
But certainly the policy decision has been taken.
Has been taken. Okay. So in relation to the cost of the R&D, first of all, we've a substantial amount of companies. Was it 10 companies of the top 100 that don't pay any tax, or was it 8? Sorry, you gave an update, Mr. McCarthy.
8.
Eight companies of the top 100 don't pay any tax at all. 8 of the top 100 companies in Ireland don't pay any tax.
They didn't pay corporation tax in Ireland
that's
for the year in question.
But that's all we're talking about.
I understand. Because of double tax.
Absolutely.
Or R&D.
Yeah, or rolling over losses or something.
Mostly double tax.
Double tax.
There's most of the...
Yeah, capital, yeah. So there are 3 or 4 major reasons why they wouldn't. But the fact is that 8 of the top 100 didn't pay any tax.
Yeah, but the majority reason is because they've paid higher tax in respect of that income in another country.
I've heard you give that answer.
But that is the answer.
Okay, all right. In relation to the question I'm trying to get out is, the cost is higher. The number of companies claiming the research is lower, isn't that right?
Yeah, but it's marginal. It's 1,570 in 2014, 1,532 in 2015.
It's not. It's marginal.
It's marginal. It's been between 12 and 15. It ranged from 1532 to 1576.
Okay.
So it's very much.
Okay. And just the reliance, and it goes back to the Department of Finance, the reliance on multinationals and a small section of multinationals, and you identified a risk in relation to that. What have you done about the risk? What have revenue done about the risk following your analysis? Where did you go?
Well, we've identified it as a risk for some time now. I think something like 6% of total tax revenue comes from, I think, about 10 firms. Okay, so clearly there's a concentration risk. In terms of mitigating against that risk, all one can do really is, because you can't say to a company, we no longer want this company in Ireland. It's obviously not part of our industrial policy. Is to make sure that the public finances are in a better shape to be able to absorb any shock to, if one of those firms was to move or was to reduce its tax payments substantially. This is why it's important from a policy perspective that we achieve a structural balance next year, that we rebuild our fiscal buffers, including, as the Minister has done, establish the rainy day fund. But also, I think it's important to mention, and this is the final point, Deputy, is that under the fiscal rules, the so-called expenditure benchmark, growth in public expenditure is now anchored on the trend growth rate of the economy, so averaged over 10 years rather than on one particular year. So that reduces the probability that you spend, or that a government might spend, so-called windfall gains. Okay, so it's...
You might put in, the vote has been called in the chamber.